The seemingly citywide problem of car burglaries is a top priority for the head of the NOPD. Superintendent Shaun Ferguson sat down with Tan Trung to talk about his first year in the NOPD's top position.
It happened again. This time, car burglars hit Uptown New Orleans. Last night, at least 7 cars targeted on one street. Gordon Russell with the New Orleans Advocate posted this on Twitter saying, quote, "My lucky number came up last night."
We are just as frustrated as the citizens.
Initially, we sat down with Shaun Ferguson to talk about his first year as police chief. But with auto break-ins up an estimated 160% since 2015, Ferguson knew he had to address an issue that's become widespread.
Right now, we as an agency, we want to get this auto burglary thing under control. That is a top priority.
While the city's murder rate has been decreasing in recent years, 2019 was significant. There were 119 murders last year, the lowest in almost 50 years. That took place with Ferguson as police chief. Now many are looking to him to reduce property crimes. His predecessor established the Tiger Task Force to tackle armed robberies when that crime got out of hand. We pressed Ferguson on his strategy for car break-ins. Do you think it's time right now to establish a task force for auto burglaries?
So Tiger has been instrumental in that as well. They have been assisting the districts with that. The arrests speak for themselves.
Current uptick in crime.
That didn't seem to be the case this week when many Lakeview residents vented frustration about property crime in their neighborhood. Before that, it was people in New Orleans East. Ferguson says to reduce car break-ins, his officers have to be more visible. He says there are also covert operations taking place. But Ferguson says he needs help from the criminal justice system, which he says has been releasing repeat offenders.
Even if incarceration is not the answer in some cases, there should be some sort of accountability factor to let them know there are consequences to their actions.
A consequence of being police chief is coming under scrutiny. Ferguson accepts that, and he accepts the fact that more people are talking about auto burglaries at a time when the city has seen less violence. Tan Trung, Eyewitness News.
Another tool Chief Ferguson says that can be used to reduce crime are the city's crime cameras.